Hi, and welcome to the Notepad Show. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at how to build USD assets using the infamous component builder in Solaris. Let's get started. We're also going to be doing this focusing, of course, on RenderMan. So I'm going to bring up Houdini here, and I have a scene already set up, ready to go. And I think we're going to start. I have two assets here that we're going to bring in. I built the networks already and thought it just would be easier and faster. So all of these component builder networks are easily built just by typing component builder, which is a preset of 4 nodes. You have the geometry, and this is where you load in your geometry. You put down a file node. And you attach it to the default. If you had a proxy, or you wanted to create, let's say, a proxy using a poly reduce, if I can spell poly reduce, you can put in a poly reduce and have an optional proxy image. But in this case, we're keeping it super simple, and we're going to have a file, and that is required to be in the component geometry node. Here we set up the network. Here we associate the network with the geometry, almost like a material assign node. Here's the output node. This is what helps us write the packaged asset to disk. And yeah, so I already have a network built. Let's concentrate on that. This happens to be a barrel, simple barrel, and I have a transform on it for scale. So you see that here. And then we go and put that into the component material, the left-hand side. And then I have a shader network. So I should probably explain, I got these assets from Quixel. So I'm using Quixel in this example, but it works with anything. As long as you have a model and you have the shader network that you intend to build for that model, this works. So I'm using, some of these kinds of assets here. So I could download this table, which is an FBX file. In my case, I only downloaded the level of detail 0. Okay. In a lot of the models, you can also download the high poly version if you're going to be really close to the camera. And then, of course, all the associated maps. In this case, the only map that I had EXR for was displacement, because you sort of want that kind of bit depth when dealing with displacement. The other maps, you could use JPEG, although RenderMan does suggest that you use EXR there as well. That is a matter of taste and a matter of how much disk space you have or are willing to dedicate to a project. So I leave that to you guys. Anyway, that's where I got the asset, and that's where I got the FBX. And the shader, is just a simple RenderMan Material Builder Hydra. Okay. And then I named it, double clicked, and created my PBR. Now in this case, this was a metallic workflow PBR. I'm definitely going to be doing a video on PBR shading in the future. But in the meantime, This is, and you can look in the documentation of RenderMan. I'll put a link in the description on how to do the metallic workflow. So we have a diffuse map that was came with the asset, and I'll bring that up. So we got a diffuse map. We got a metallic map, roughness, normal, and in this case, we have an opacity for the bullet holes or the holes down here. I think I thought they were bullet holes, but actually it's a stove. So they're holes that are made so that air can be sucked into the barrel and create more heat. Air and fire create heat. This is not a physics class, guys. Anyway, yeah, I'll go over more detail in another video how this shader network is created for metallic type materials. Also, something that you want to be aware of is I pre-convert my textures. It just makes it easier pointing them in the PXR texture. Saves time in rendering. And that way you don't have to set the color space. It will always be none because I've already done the conversion. Okay. So most of this might be very similar to how you would do a simple build in normal Solaris, just building a scene in regular Solaris. And I don't do anything here in the material library other than I do, I'll set the prefix path. So I'll do that. And if I go to the defaults, I think they put it under material, but I like to organize it a little bit differently. So I made a root called asset and then MTL inside asset. I connect that to the second input of the component material. Again, these nodes are all going to be created when you put down your component builder. And here is where I assign the shader. So I go and I assign the primitive and the material. So it's like the material assign node. Okay. So now the material is assigned to the geo. You can certainly see it. And here is where the real sort of the packaging magic happens. Here, because I have no variants, we don't have to set a default variant. We're going to go over a variant example with a fern bush. So we're going to look at a fern bush, and I'll show you how to do variants in that. But most of this stuff is at defaults. I leave everything at the defaults. You can change the up axis to be Y or Z, depending on what DCC you're going to be reopening this scene in. You can generate a thumbnail. You can view through that camera and move the camera, spin it around. We'll bring it a little closer. And you can generate a thumbnail just by clicking this button. And also set the resolution for the thumbnail. And this thumbnail would be used in the asset gallery. So right here, you can add this asset to the asset gallery. Most of this, if you middle mouse button, click the middle mouse button on the parameter name, you'll get a value. Here's the file name, so it's very clear what the name of the USD is. And then the path where that USD is going to be located. And then the other ancillary USDC files that are going to be going with this asset, that are going to be packaged along with it, along with the textures directory, which will be copying all the textures that you used. Okay, and I'm going to show that directory structure. So this really is a the heart of the node right here. This is where everything is done. Okay, pretty much again everything at their defaults. I'll just put this back. Okay. All right. When you save to disk and you're ready and you save it to disk, this is what it looks like. It creates a directory based on this name right here. So naming this and naming the component material, helpful for sure, right here. So naming this node, helpful. Here, based on that name, we have the name of the asset and all the ancillary things that go with this asset. The geo, the material network, the payload, and the thumbnail. And if we double click on the thumbnail, there it is. Little tiny graphic. And it also makes a subdirectory called textures. And it copies all the textures from the material library that we used based on this name here, right here. This is a USD package asset. Now let's see what that means. So let's say, for sake of argument, I'm not going to delete these to prove my what I'm trying to illustrate, but understand that once I put down a sublayer node, like I did in the previous episode, I now can go in. I have an empty scene here. I can go in, go to that asset that I just built right here, open it, and that's it. I mean, it's all loaded. Everything's there. I can hit render and I will get a render. With one node, everything gets loaded. That's the beauty. And I'm now going to show you, and I can delete this, a version of this with variants. And variants are nice with plants and things of that nature for using, for landscaping and things like that. You can put down a scatter node and scatter random variants of a plant on geo, like a height field converted geo, and or a plane or whatever you want, and create a landscape. That's a nice, and you can do it there are many different ways to do it in Houdini and Solaris. I'll leave that to you, but I want to show you how those kinds of components are created. All right. So if we go back to Quixel as an example, they all have like different variants. And in this case, I think I used Lady Fern in our example here. And there are like 16 variants. I'm only using the top 3 here in this example. Okay. So if we go, I'm using variant 1, variant 2, and variant 3. And in this example, although I have 3 variants, they all use the same texture, the same shader. So the texture maps are interchangeable between the variants, which makes it nice. Sometimes that might not be the case. Each variant might have its own shader network and its own associative textures. Not the case here. Okay? All right. So let's go through this. For each variant, I bring in the file. So I'm bringing in variant 1, and I have to do a transform. Nothing really changes here. The defaults don't change. I'm using the defaults here. Now, when you're using the component builder, it only gives you one component geometry. You'll have to add the other nodes yourself manually. You'll also have to add a node here that we'll get to in a few seconds. But for the sake of each variant has its own component geometry in this example. So here we have variant 2 of the plant. And here's variant 3. Okay. They get all pumped into the component geometry variant node. I almost think of it like a merge node. It's not, but everything gets pumped into there. And we set the variant set to be called geo. That's fine. And in the working variant, we're just setting temporarily what we want to see in the viewport. I could have picked any one of these to be the choice. But in this case, I picked variant 1. It's the biggest, nicest. It'll probably make one of the nicer thumbnails. Although I think when we create the thumbnails, it will create separate thumbnails for all 3. Okay. And we need this component geometry variant node, and that's something you'll have to add. This will get pumped into the component material, which is like the assigned material network I mentioned earlier, on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, we're creating our shader network. Now, this shader network is a little bit different. Before I get into that, let me make sure I'm telling you everything. Yeah, everything else is default, but I do set a working variant. So let's go over to the material. Again, it's a RenderMan material builder Hydra. Called it Fern Shader, and then inside, this is my plant. This is my stereotypical plant PBR shader network. We have diffuse going into diffuse color. Translucency, that's going into, you have to enable double-sided, and that goes into the transmit color, okay? Diffuse transmit color. That's where translucency goes. It is a color map, okay? Then we have roughness, that goes into specular roughness as always, normal. Opacity, that goes into presence. And of course, displacement goes into displacement. Now, something that you should be aware of, and I do this by choice. I didn't try this. This is just something that I'm doing. For displacement to work in Solaris, you do need to put down a render geometry node. But I want to leave that to the user whether they want to do that or not. There might be cases where an asset is so far away from the camera, turning on displacement might not be advantageous. So I think I could put down a render geometry node and do things like subdivision and things like that. But I wouldn't suggest it. I would, when you're putting down your sublayer and you're bringing in this node, do it then. Then you can add those nodes. But I don't want to bake any kind of specialities because it also can prevent you from using another DCC that you might have to. So you don't want to lock yourself in and bake stuff in if you don't have to. It's always easier to add than take away when it comes, in my opinion, when it comes to dealing with assets in Solaris. So we have the shader network. We're plugging it in the same way. Now here, I actually didn't do the assign, but it still worked. But I'm going to do it. It's just good practice. I don't think you really have to do it anymore, but I'm doing it, so I just dragged and dropped it. And then, of course, I'm writing it out. Now, when you're writing it out, this is where things are a little bit different with variants. When you're writing out the component output, this is huge. You have to set, first of all, you want to set a default variant right away. So set a default variant, sort of like you set a working variant, usually the same. Then you want to make sure, you're putting in all your metadata and all that stuff. The file name, I leave it at the defaults, and you rename things here and here. Of course, set the names you want to put for your export options, your payload, USDC, geo, material, etc., extras, all that stuff. Your subdirectory, what you want to call it. Of course, we talked about up access, whether it be Y or Z. Your units. But here, this is not turned on with this component output node. When you're dealing with variants, you have to turn this on. You set the variant set, and you set the variants directory, like the texture directory. Everything else pretty much stays default. Of course, create your thumbnails if you like. Okay. And let's take a look at what that looks like once it is written to disk. Okay. So you have your texture directory. I mentioned the firm directory that has all three variants. The actual asset, geomaterial, payload, and the thumbnail. So it does read just the one thumbnail. There might be a way, I'm not sure how, where you could have all three thumbnails. I'll have to look into that. If I find any additional information about that, I'll post it as a sticky in the comment section. Okay. And this is a really weird thing because it's only showing the one working geometry here, mesh. But it is, when you when you turn on the variants here, the variant layers, they will get written to disk. And you always want to check and make sure when you're writing your assets. But the variants will get written to disk right here with the variant layer, and it is looking right here at, okay, what are all the variants? Oh, they're all plugged into the geometry variant node. So this right here is reading based on right here. Okay, and that's it. I'm going to show just one extra thing. So I'm going to put down the sublayer. Now, one of the problems is when you put down a sublayer of a variant, in this case the ferns, USD, it's only listing that first variant, the working one, the default one. It's also it's the working one temporarily, and the default one when you select it as the default one in the component output. So that's the only one showing up. The way you see all your variants is by putting down an explore variance node. This will sort of unfurl all the variants. And that's what it did. Yeah. Now we see all the variants in the shader network. And all the materials associated with it. Okay? And there are a whole bunch of settings you can set here. And you could, do a manipulation. I'm just going to show a simple one. Transform. So I'm going to transform just one of the variants. Okay? But I could pull out, I believe I could pull out another one here. Pull out this one here. All right. Okay, and then merge them back together so you see all of them. And I should see all three. Yeah. So here are all three variants. So I hope this was helpful. And I hope that you guys get something out of this. All you people participating in this year's art challenge, I hope that you kind of can find this useful in building out your scenes. Besides Quixel, another good source that is, because Quixel doesn't do CCO license, is Polyhaven does CCO license, and they have grasses and trees and things like that, and all kinds of assets that are really good. And you can use these same techniques here with those assets. I'll put a link in the description to Polyhaven. And that's it. So have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.